everyone. Welcome to Meet Your Farmer, Farm Foundation's new podcast. I'm your host, Naomi Mijan. If you don't know Farm Foundation, we're a nonprofit located in the Chicago area, working to promote understanding at the intersections of agriculture and society. We've been accelerating solutions for agriculture since the 1930s, and we're excited to launch our very first podcast. The goal of this podcast is to help you get to know just a little bit more about the American farmers who are producing the food, fuel, and fiber we all use every day. I am very excited to welcome A.G. Kawamura onto the show. A.G. is a third-generation farmer in Southern California and operates Orange County Produce with his brother. A.G. served as California Secretary of Agriculture from 2003 to 2010. He is founding chair of Solutions for Urban Agriculture, which grows produce for area food banks, and he is involved in many other organizations, including as founding co-chair of Solutions from the Land, and with Farm Foundation as a Roundtable Fellow since 2011, and currently serving on the Farm Foundation Board of Directors. He also serves on the board of Western Growers. A.G., welcome to Meet Your Farmer.
Thank you, Naomi.
So as I said in the intro, this is a podcast trying to get folks to know a little bit more about their farmers. So with your family being involved in family farming, I'm assuming you grew up on a farm, but did you?
No, actually, I did not. We're a fruit and vegetable grower. We call it fresh produce, and we're I could say we're a farmer in an urban area as well as an urban farmer. Years ago, when I was born in 1956, so when we moved into Orange County in '58, down here just near Disneyland area in California, it was a very rural part of the state at the time. Orange County was one of the top 5 producing counties, at least in the top 10 producing counties in the United States in terms of product value. And of course, we had citrus and all kinds of vegetables and a lot of open ground here. Since that time, the urbanization has advanced tremendously, and now we really are an urban farmer. We have been a landless farmer for over 37 years, interestingly, and we have an interesting model where we've learned, because there were so many developers and so much open land to work with, that we had a chance to learn how to be, we call it land managers with an edible landscape theme. So we grow on all kinds of different properties, from vacant lots all the way up to large military bases under the power lines, University of California property, University of Cal State property, university properties. We have learned to be an asset to the landowners in the area, because open ground in an area like Orange County means you have weed abatement, you have rodents and other varmints that are there, and challenges for invasive species and endangered species as well. So we've just learned to manage these properties in a scale, let's say about 1,000 acres, 600 to 1,000 acres every year, depending on the year. Growing fruits and vegetables, usually double cropping each year, with the crops that grow well in the winter and the summer crops that grow well in the summer. And we're close enough to the ocean that we're really not affected by the extreme heat that you hear about. You know, it might be 110, 120 degrees just 30 miles away from us. But over here, we'll be in the high 90s, low hundreds on those really hot days. So we have a different kind of agriculture. The most important difference, I think, is we're irrigated agriculture, because we are in an arid climate. So everything we grow, we use irrigation, whether that's drip tape, whether that's sprinklers. We don't do furrow irrigation anymore, but it's still a part of why we can do well in this area. We turn the water on and off as we need it, and it's a precision kind of agriculture, not hoping for rain-fed blessings from the skies.
So what does it mean at the beginning when you said that you're landless?
for the many years where we were farming on not only our own properties here in Orange County, we would find that there's always property to lease, and I think that's the model for so many farmers and ranchers around the country, around the world. You hope to have a home ranch, you hope to have your own properties, but when you have properties that you can lease and do that as a partnership with the landowner. To be landless means that you don't own the land, but you have land that you can farm on. The jeopardy of that is when that land is ready to be developed, or if some higher value crop comes in and it might displace you, you will get that unfortunate call from a landowner who says, the landlord, and they'll say, thanks for being on our property, but you need to get off and move over for whatever the next use of that property is. But that's what I mean by saying landless, is we've learned for the last 37 years to be able to grow at a specific size. We're not small, but we're not big either. But for our county, we're at ample size, and we sell basically into the commercial chain store business.
Thank you for that. So I still want to go back to the. So you've been doing this for decades. You've been farming for decades. But as I was looking into your background, you went to undergrad, at least, for Spanish Lit, if I got that right. So that made me wonder: did you always know you wanted to be a farmer, or what was that path like?
Well, you asked if I had grown up on a farm, and no, I did not. I grew up in actually off farm, but because we farmed in different parcels around the region, it's just when we came into Orange County, that's the decision my father and my mother made, to be a little away from the ranch, and it was at that time then I think I became by accident a beekeeper when I was 14 years old, 13, 14 years old, and continued to do that. So that was my first real on-farm experience. And then I was raised where we would be on the farm, but because we were shippers as well, in California, we call it grower shippers. Our shipping company, we worked with multiple growers and handled their produce and sold their produce under a single label. Our original label was called the Western Chief label, going back to the 1946 is when we started that company, right after World War II. And my grandparents are all from Japan. And both of my parents were born in Los Angeles, but the World War II was obviously an interruption in our farm business. But when we cranked up again, my grandfather, my father cranked up again in 1946. We continued with that model of being a grower shipper all those years. So a lot of my time was not spent on the farm, but it was actually spent in the packing shed. And in fact, when I came back from college, I started in the packing shed with a brief stint on a vineyard just prior to getting there. But I actually was an ag econ major at UC Davis for the better part of a year or two, and I realized that I thought I might be a writer, and transferred to Cal Berkeley, thinking that I would pursue a writing career. And that major, I was a comparative literature major with English, Spanish, and French as my minors. And so I was really fortunate to have already learned how to speak Spanish well, learn to read and write it well. And that ended up being one of the most valuable things I could have ever brought with me back to the ag sector. Our entire ag force is mostly Spanish speaking. And when I was late in my senior year, actually, I thought I might join the Peace Corps or do something along those lines, because I really was concerned about the challenges of global food insecurity, and thought I might pursue at least being involved in that. And of course, that came with a realization that we already have a farming company, and if you're ever going to end world hunger, it's going to be done through agriculture. And I remember late in my senior year asking my dad if he had a spot for me on the farm that I could come back to. And when I came back, I never was more happy than to get back on a farm and pursue that part of a career, which started in doing sales and then eventually went to the growing side. And part of the reason I got to go to the growing side was because I did speak Spanish. Even though I didn't have the agronomy background or the ag engineering background, I had a pretty steep learning curve on how to learn about farming.
Was your dad surprised?
He was. He, he didn't expect. My brother's younger than me, but I don't think he expected either of us to necessarily go into business. But sure enough, we both ended up there, and it's been just the most rewarding kind of career. Doesn't mean that it's easy. In fact, it's always challenging. And I've got a violin I can play all day long about how tough things are for farmers, especially in California right now. Maybe I shouldn't say especially California, but California really does make it hard to farm in terms of the regulatory burden, the tax burdens, the just different challenges that other growing areas necessarily don't have to face. Our cost of production a lot of times are significantly higher here, whether it's the wages, whether it's the cost of water. All those different things add up, and when it makes it hard to be competitive if you're the high cost producer of a crop. And even though it might be great quality, then that's where hopefully your marketing side of your business helps make you that much stronger as a company when you can do your own marketing and your own growing. You know, at least you have a little bit more of your future in your own hands that way, and we've been fortunate to be that way.
Before we get too far away from it, I wanted to pick up on the point about your focus on and your concern with hunger and ending hunger. What was it that since college that you've been focused on this?
I just remember during college, I actually got myself into a little situation where I had to borrow some money. I didn't want to call my folks, and so I borrowed some money from some friends to deal with a housing issue. And as I paid that back, I remember basically learning to live on a very small amount of money per day, about $1 a day. Learn how to cook a lot because I always did like cooking, but you'd make a big old soup or stew and, feed on that for a couple of days. But I literally was a hungry, starving college student, and I ended up getting a job, interestingly, in a Japanese restaurant because I think I applied to all the Asian restaurants in the area to see if I could get a job and help earn some dollars. And I started out washing dishes. But I remember, when you're washing dishes, you can a lot of food comes in there, and there's a lot of food. So I knew that I could get plenty of food at a restaurant, both when you sit down for dinner afterwards, at the closing of the restaurant with the rest of the staff, and all the way throughout. So it became maybe a real life observation that if you're hungry all day long, you're in a different state of mind, because you're thinking about the hunger. And it just became really clear that if you have these significant populations on the planet that day after day don't know where their next meal's coming from, you're not really in a state of living anymore. You're in a state of survival. And that became really clear for me, that the difference between abundance and scarcity then is driven by so many different aspects. But certainly one of the most frustrating things is for us in agriculture. I do believe we have the capacity to feed everybody on the planet, but we don't necessarily have the will to get that done. And so that's become part of a driving force for me, is to think long and hard about, at least within our own area, within our own region, within our own companies, and then talking about policy around a country, a state, or a world. Is we really have to find that imagination and the will to correct the situation where we have hunger anywhere. We really shouldn't. Because it's a kind of negligence, especially for young kids and infants and young people, where if they're getting an incomplete meal day after day, why would that be any different than me starving one of my plants or a farm animal? And they'll never reach their full potential once you miss out day after day on a proper fertilizer program, if you will, or a feeding program. And we just kind of don't think about it as a world, as a nation, as a region, that we have really significant food insecurity. Obviously, so extreme in some places where you have people dying, so extreme in other places where you just have challenges with cognitive development that's not taking place because they're getting a lousy meal. Now, they might be having plenty of calories, but that goes back to a different thing about what are you eating. We're fortunate that we grow nutrient-dense fruits and vegetables, and more people are paying attention to that lately, which is a really important thing. And that's how we got involved right now locally, growing a pretty significant amount of fruits and vegetables for the food bank on an incredibly innovative collaboration that's been really fun to be a part of. We're starting our 4th year of harvesting about an acre a week, about delivering about 40,000 pounds of fruits and vegetables to the food bank, mostly planted, weeded, and harvested by volunteers from the community.
That's
So
amazing.
it's a really great paradigm shift in understanding that, those most in need might actually get some of the best diet you can imagine.
Yeah. So talk more about what are you growing?
Well, we're finishing up our summer plantings right now of zucchini, yellow squash, bell peppers, watermelons, honeydews, a few jalapenos to throw that in there, a little bit of tomatoes as just a small amount there, and then we'll shift into our winter crops of cabbage, cauliflower, and broccoli, a little broccolini. And the reason and then we have, before that, we'll have some winter squash, some butternut squash, acorn squash, spaghetti squash. But these are all at volumes where the food bank was able to mention to us, the one we work closest with on this one project, that they can handle about 40,000 pounds or 80, 500 pound bins. So the food bank let us know that they can, on a weekly basis, they run through about 80 500-pound bins of fresh produce, and if we could produce that here in their backyard, that would be great. And so we said immediately, well, I know that because I'm a vegetable grower, that cabbage is about 40,000 pounds an acre is how much you get. Celery is a little bit heavier, 50 or 60,000 pounds. If you produce really good crop of watermelon, that's maybe 70, 80,000 pounds of watermelon per acre. And so you start to do the math, and we were trying to get the price of the produce down between 20 and 30 cents a pound in the cost of production. And if we could get it to that number, the food bank had dollars to be able to buy that produce and utilize it. We also realized, because we didn't have necessarily the right kind of cooling facilities, we don't have a hydro cool to take the heat out of the product once we harvest. We chose crops that are a little bit more hardy. Good example, we tried to grow some celery. It was beautiful celery, but they didn't have the right cooling hydro cool to get the temperature and the heat out of it, so it went pretty limp. And what was beautiful celery became something that was hard for them to even give away, even though it was still edible. But these are the kind of things we learn about with the food banks in trying to understand, can we supply a very consistent, steady supply of staple vegetables that can go into the diet of their clients? And of course we can, is the answer to that. And we've done it now. This is going into our 4th year. We keep on modifying it. Now we're looking into some other, would you call it, an augmentation to the program, where we can grow actually some of the crops that you wouldn't think you'd find in a food bank, but reason you wouldn't find it because they're too expensive for people to buy. But let's say it's something like fennel, or something like eggplants, or something like I don't know, kohlrabi, different veggies and different kinds of fruits. We're looking at avocados and citrus to be able to, and some stone fruit eventually, to bring on in. And the more that we can make a cornucopia of products available through a standard farm model, but it's a little different because we have a tremendous amount of volunteers in our community that are willing to step up and help with the farm process. So the best way to describe that is we live in Southern California. There's about 20 million people that live within an hour and a half of our farm here. And I'm farming, the farm that we're doing this project on is the University of California, has a research station right here in our backyard here in Irvine, California. It's about a 200 plus acre facility, but we've kind of occupied about 25, 30 acres of it, and are growing, like I say, close to an acre a week. So almost 52 acres worth of plantings each year here. And just making that available with the help of these enormous amount of volunteers. Now, the volunteers might come from corporations, as you drive a road and you see people with their yellow vests on, cleaning up trash on the side of the road. Many
Sure.
corporations ask allow their employees to have a work day doing community service, and they get paid by the company, right, to go and do some community service. Our project is a perfect fit for that. So we'll get large corporations come out, sometimes by the busload, or large corporations coming out by just the van, and suddenly you've got on a given day 20 volunteers, or on a given day you'll have 200 volunteers. And in the past, we used to have a gleaning program that we used, and on a given weekend, I remember we've had 1,000 volunteers out, and they're kind of like locusts at that point. They kind of, but anything that looks that edible, they'll pick up out of the ground. But it's kind of just re-looking at how the community can be a part of the solutions coming out of urban agriculture, let alone solutions coming out of large-scale stuff as well. It's a remarkable time to kind of rethink, and maybe COVID helped us the most because so many of the volunteers that the food bank had going into their warehouse regularly, daily, they had thousands of volunteers that suddenly were not able to go in because of the masking requirements. Mm-hmm. And as we were talking one day, they were bemoaning, the food bank was bemoaning the fact that they wish they could get more fruits and vegetables because there were so many more people showing up at the food bank because they were out of work. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, they said, but we've got all these volunteers, and there's nothing for them to do. And that's when we started to brainstorm and say, well, you know what, we can do a lot of things if we have that many volunteers. And for those of us in the fresh produce industry, the number one cost generally is labor. Labor usually is 50%, sometimes 60% of the cost of a product is the labor, the box, the transportation, the cooling. The cost of growing it is not so high. And so I grow green beans, for example, and we were hand picking green beans up to about 3 years ago, but the cost of hand picking labor is so high here in California, I can't compete with Mexico. So we quit hand picking and we went to a machine, and even with the machine, we have a hard time competing. But the green beans are really cheap to grow. They're just really expensive to pick and handle and sort and put into a box, and they don't give you a whole lot of pounds per acre. But there's still, people love them. And so today, for example, tomorrow, for example, we're going to have a group of 50, 60 people come and pick some green beans for the food bank. And it's a part of a project where we understand that the cost is higher for the food bank. So we have our Solutions for Urban Ag nonprofit. It's sfua.org is our website, where we realize that we can augment with the food bank the cost of these products and get those higher cost veggies or fruits into the food bank through this partnership.
Got it. So that partnership helps that cost to get back down to where the food bank, it works for the food bank as well.
And we get tremendous help from our industry too. So the people that supply drip tape or fertilizer or crop tools, crop protection tools, the people that supply implements, let's say hose and shovels, the people that supply just the different inputs that we need, seeds and transplants. Those are some of our most expensive costs, obviously. It's wonderful to get that kind of support from the industry when they know that these projects are not so big, but they have a lot of impact. And a lot of times we're able to say that we have money, so don't we just would love to have a nice discount, if you will. We're not asking you to give us the products, but if you want to give to them, we're happy to receive them.
Fair enough, and I'm sure lots of people are happy to partner. So just to be clear, is everything that you produce going to food banks, or do you also produce for the general market?
Well, on this project, specifically here at the University of California's South Coast Research and Extension Center, we call it the SCREC, nice acronym. Everything we produce here, the food bank actually owns the crop here. I'm just the farmer of record. So, and we've in our company we've dragged a few retired farmers out of retirement to come and help. I'm not retired yet, but I probably should be. But In our other operations, we are farming and doing some other contract growing for one of the larger companies that grows carrots, for example. We're growing some carrots for the first time in almost 50 years in our county. Carrots have come back. We grow currently. I'm growing some pumpkins for a really successful agritourism friends company. So we're getting into Halloween, and that's one of their good money makers. But we have a good capacity to grow things, and we continue to do just that. We are moving away currently from growing things that have the inherent risk of the marketplace. We are in the strawberry business through a different company, and that has been one of the biggest backbone, I guess, of who we are currently. It continues to be part of a strawberry company that we used to be the only owners of the shipping side of it. Now we're minority owners of it. It's called Gempack, but we are watching in California and the west coast from Washington all the way down. We're just watching a tremendous shift in how do you stay in business in the fresh produce industry. It's been not fun to watch how tough it is to see the family farms really starting to either you have to get big, or you have to get small and regional and local to an extent to be able to make things work. If you're kind of in the middle, I think that's one of the toughest places to be right now, because the overhead costs are just so tremendous. And so everybody's evolving and looking for different ways to take their expertise and put it into play with a crop that can, keep you from losing money. And it used to be in our produce industry, we loved it because you're always hoping you could hit a home run with a short market, especially out of our area down here in Southern California. And those days are kind of long gone. Now we just hope we can get on base every season and not strike out. And the strawberry industry has been a good example of one of those kind of industries that you get 2 back-to-back years of horrendous, of really good rain, if you will, record rain. But rain and strawberries don't go well together unless you're just in their planting stage. So the amount of lost crop because of torrential rains these last 2 years has been pretty tough on the industry. And I think everybody is trying to continue to reassess if this is the new norm. And this is how we talk about climate in agriculture, is it's changing climate patterns that can cause all kinds of problems. So, as we always say, unpredictable weather means unpredictable harvest. It's always been that way. It's never going to be different. And you hopefully don't get caught flat-footed with really horrible weather events. And sometimes they dodge you, sometimes they don't. We had the first hurricane in 70 years here in Orange County last year.
That's right.
Hurricane Hillary.
Yeah.
And it's funny, a friend of mine who just passed away at 99 years old remembers the last time we had a hurricane in our county, because he was there.
Oh,
which
wow.
is kind of amazing.
Yeah. Oh, I had forgotten about that one. You started talking about the evolution, and that was something I wanted to ask you about. Since you've started farming, what is kind of one of the more notable ways that things have changed, or that you've changed how you approach farming?
I think you could always say precision agriculture has always been the hallmark of any successful farms. You don't want to over irrigate, you don't want to under irrigate, you don't want to over fertilize, but you certainly don't want to under fertilize, right? And you want to try and do things with as much precision as you can. I think the huge, I would call it a cascade of new technologies, new methods in a single lifetime is something I can surely point to. We used to furrow irrigate. We used to I remember the first large animal I ever petted as a maybe 3 or 4 year old was a mule that was in a barn on one of our ranches from a mule team. That was a plow team that was actually used for farm work before the tractors showed up, right? So I'm like I say, I'm 68 years old, and to think that just before I was born, there was, basically a lot of guys didn't have tractors in Southern California. that's a lot of change to have happen in the course of a lifetime. And yet when drip irrigation came along, it helped us replace our sprinklers, and the sprinklers had replaced our furrow irrigation. So now that we are on using drip irrigation, we've been experimenting on and off with hydroponics, we've aeroponics, we've experimented with above ground production. There's just new technologies coming out all the time, and we're fortunate that because we're down here, people like to see if we want to do a trial of this or that, and so that continues to take place. Some of the huge, I think, most significant changes that don't really get a lot of attention is the breeding programs that have been able to give us our different seeds and varieties, our cultivars. It was just the other day, 2 years ago, it was 118 degrees out here in Orange County, a temperature I'd never seen before in my lifetime. We had a crops of green beans, consistent, continuous plantings of green beans that we harvest week after week after week down here. If that same heat had come 30 years earlier, we would have lost 100% of all the young beans. But because of these new varieties that we have, we lost maybe 30, 40%, or 10, even 20%, depending on some areas where the beans were pretty well set. The different breeding then opportunities that have made plants tougher for heat tolerance, for salinity tolerance, for different kinds of stress. Those are the kinds of advances that have helped us stay in business and have yields that we've seen in our life that are, 100% higher than 30, 40 years ago on some of these crops. And that's a big number. It's one thing to get 10, 20, 30, 40%, but if you can show that you've increased your yields by over 100% compared to 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, that tells you a lot of what kind of advances we're looking at. And then saving your crop from pests. I just lost actually a little planting of green beans. I'd like to say it's because we were not paying attention as much as we should have. And it's rare when we lose anything to insect pests these days because we have wonderful tools to use. Now I've grown both conventional and organic, and they're both, systems that we have that create different ways of looking at what you're trying to accomplish. For me, because I don't own the ground, it's harder to be an organic grower when you can only be on a piece of ground sometimes, knowing you're going to walk away when someone wants to develop it. So that's a challenge for that kind of a farmer like me who doesn't own the ground. But I will also say that the marketplace for organic for us has changed so much that instead of those really high prices that we used to get, we compete directly with Baja California here, out of Southern California. Same season, same general climate pattern. We're only 90 miles away, so we're in the same general Southern California region as like Baja California. And the amount of organic product, for example, that comes in, it makes the market not as tight as it used to be or as hot as it used to be. And so as those prices come down, suddenly the prices you need to be able to break even, because we're the higher cost producer, those dollars aren't there. The best example is on highly perishable, labor-intensive crops. We're paying, let's say, $20 an hour right now in Southern California, actually a little bit more than that. And in Mexico, just 100 miles away, they're paying $20 a day.
Oh, wow. Okay.
For the same crops. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you can do the math on that. Now, they might have the same water costs, they might have the same fertilizer costs, they might have even higher diesel costs, but when your labor is the most important cost you have, how do you compete with that? And so a lot of the guys have picked up and gone into Mexico. Out of our Imperial Coachella Valley here in Southern Cal, we used to have 27,000 acres of there was 27,000 acres of table grapes just 15 years ago. To this year, now there's less than 2,000, I think.
Oh.
So where did they go? Well, they just picked up and moved, tore the vines out and moved. It's the same Sonoran Desert, but then now they're in Mexico, harvesting and doing what they do with a better cost structure. to be able to be more competitive and stay in business. So these are the kind of challenges I think all the farmers face. You can be a really good grower and you just still can't stay in business because you can't compete unless your marketing is such that it allows you to be competitive, or you find some way to innovate, or you find some niche, or you find some unique products that you can grow better than anybody else. These are all the kinds of things that you hope will carry you through. And the produce industry is a really under I guess you'd call it under reported industry for the general public. They seem to understand corn and wheat and rice, soy, but they don't. The two things they don't understand well, the public does not understand well, is what a huge gamble it is for the guys that are dependent on the right amount of rain when it's rain fed. They don't irrigate, whereas here we are, irrigating, turning water on and off. It's so different, the different kinds of agriculture in our country and our world, that it's nice to be able to have a chance to describe it here with you.
Mm-hmm. It's great to learn about it.
One observation really quickly, I remember saying that we saw almost 100% increase in yield on some crops. The only way you get 100% increase in yield is you were doing horribly to begin with. In other words, you're pretty shitty at farming,
Yeah.
whatever the crop was, to begin with, and then you figured it out, and now you got better yields, and you got closer to the top of the potential of where your yield should be. But the other side of that is there are cultivars on fruiting crops that just yield so much more than they did 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. There's that breeding. So there's two different ways you become, you see significant increases in yield, is that you just become a better farmer and recognize that you've pushed for the potential of the plant better. And part of that can come then from great breeding that just gives you a better plant that will give you more fruit, or more product, or grow more robustly, or different things like that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So when it was for us to go and increase significantly, is we learned how to be better farmers over the years. A lot of times just watching your neighbors and looking over the fence line and realizing they're doing a hell of a lot better job, and then asking at the coffee shop, well, would you share with us what are you doing? And in our county, it was always wonderful. Farmers were always willing to help each other do better. We were all kind of us against the rest of the state, rest of the world, right? And I think that sometimes is true still in so many counties, where the coffee shop is where you learn. That's where I learned an awful lot about farming, because I didn't have that background coming out of college. And even if you have that a college background, doesn't mean you're good. Doesn't mean that that you know how to farm, right? We get to work with a lot of kids that come out of college, and they're smart, they're intelligent, but they have no farm background, no farm experience. And you realize that and I made this mistake once of handing over an entire little program to some kids that just got out of college, thinking, and they could talk, they could show you a great diagram on a computer. And at the time, computers were still new, so we were pretty impressed. But the truth is, they could barely hook up a disc to a tractor and figure out how to make it work. It's a little bit of everything. You try and improve every year.
Yeah. And that actually, in the conversation that I had with Klaus, he was talking about the new farmers coming in that I forget how he called it, but non-traditional farmers, farmers coming into the industry for the first time. And you can learn a lot, but we had a brief discussion about what do you miss by not having grown up? All that stuff that you just absorb by kind of growing up in the farming environment, and little things that you just pick up by osmosis. I think the final verdict was they catch up, but there's a bit of School of Hard Knocks for a little moment there.
I couldn't agree more.
So my last question. So you're a third generation farmer. What would you want your great grandchildren to know about you as a farmer?
it's not it used to be an audacious dream, but not anymore, because I think because of COVID, I've in my mind, I've realized that probably one of the easiest of the Sustainable Development Goals that the United Nations has is to end hunger have an end of hunger on the planet. And the third actually has to do with nutrition and healthy lives. But I think since COVID, I realized that probably the easiest thing to accomplish on this list of 17 goals really is to be able to end hunger. And I would like to say that in our generation, before I pass away sometime in the future here, I'd like to see the day that the world is able to announce that we've had a week, 40 days, 40 nights where nobody was hungry, because we made it happen. I mentioned it earlier. We certainly have the capacity to make that happen. We've had that capacity for almost 50 years, since actually even longer, since the end of the World War II and Korean War, where logistically it is possible to certainly feed everybody on the planet all the time. Knowing that is, why don't we do it? Becomes the next question, or how can we do it more efficiently? Well, there's all kinds of efficient ways to get it done. We're showing that there's, even in an urban area, you can feed a ton of people. And the idea that ending hunger has a value. There's so many values that can be accomplished once we do that. In terms of, like earlier, we were talking about cognitive development. We were talking about developmental issues with young kids that don't have a good diet. But I would love to think a grandkid would say, yeah, it was in those years that they figured out that that's probably the not right to think that we went this long, this many decades. We always like to. You've heard the term. We don't like the idea of think tank anymore. We want to be a do tank, and this idea that how many more studies globally do we need? How many more millions of dollars do we pour into studies to talk about hunger and talk about food insecurity, and act as if it's something that's, I don't know. It's like a sickness in a way. It's all we need to know is if people day after day after day don't have access to food, and that's why we learned about food deserts during COVID. We learned about food insecurity for seniors. We learned about poor dietary choices, and that constantly plays out in the food wars that are out there. But the simple thing is, guess what? Why don't we make something a concentrated effort to just end hunger on the planet? The minute you do that, I think the potential for a cascade of other accomplishments follows right behind that, because for the world to be able to do something like that, it tells you that we've kind of turned a page and said, yeah, that century that is behind us had a lot of misery in it, but let's just move into a world of abundance. And that's where the solutions from the land concept comes, is that we don't want to be in a world of scarcity, because we know where that leads. We want to create abundance, and that's where we recognize that agriculture has such an important role to play.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That was excellent. AG, thank you so much. This has been such a fascinating and wonderful conversation.
Thanks, Naomi.
And thanks to you for listening to this episode of the Meet Your Farmer podcast from Farm Foundation. Be sure to check out the other episodes in this season. If you have recommendations for farmers we should have on the show, or have any other feedback, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. If you liked what you heard, be sure to subscribe and share the podcast with your network. Farm Foundation is all about creating trust and understanding at the intersections of agriculture and society. You can learn more about our work at farmfoundation.org. Until next time.